Hello, everyone. I am Naomi Wang, Curator for Southeast Asia and Peranakan at the ACM. Welcome to the first of the ACM Talks lecture series. To begin, I would like to invite Kenny Ting, our Director at the Asian Civilisations Museum and Peranakan Museum, and Group Director for Museums at the National Heritage Board to say a few words. Kenny, please.
Thank you so very much, Naomi. Greetings to Chris Tan and the Chris Foundation, to our board members, colleagues, and friends of ACM. It is so wonderful to see so many familiar names in the list of audience members today. I miss so much being able to say hello to all of you in the galleries in person. Welcome this evening to the inaugural ACM Talks. The purpose of ACM Talks is to promote original research into ACM's collections and permanent galleries, particularly in our four curatorial areas of trade, faith and belief, materials and design, and Peranakan. ACM Talks represents our commitment as a museum to research and academic excellence, and certainly it adds tremendously to our slate of special exhibitions-oriented talks at international symposia. The timing of the launch of ACM Talks was meant to coincide with the launch of our third floor materials and design galleries following a 7-year process of building new wings, renovating and refreshing our permanent galleries one by one. We opened our new galleries on the third floor last year, as most of our friends know, and therefore completed this new ACM. We wanted to do so many things to celebrate the completion of this multi-year refresh of the museum, including launch a series of talks. But as we all know, COVID hit, but it's never too late. And as such, we've postponed a lot of these commemorative and celebratory activities to right now, including the launch of today's talks. ACM Talks is made possible by way of a gift from the Chris Foundation. So please allow me to read a statement from the foundation to this effect. Chris Foundation is delighted to support the first series of ACM Talks. The ACM is a world-class institution and has shown great expertise in scholarly research in its field. We look forward to sharing our Asian heritage and collections with the public, as well as facilitate cross-cultural dialogues with leading researchers around the world. Through the ACM Talks, we hope to nurture a deeper understanding and curiosity into the arts and objects of Asia. The ACM's collection and scholarly research are truly treasures that Singapore can be proud of. I would like to express my deep and sincere thanks once again to Chris Tan and the Chris Foundation for your generous gift, as well as your very, very kind words. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank my colleagues at ACM for making ACM Talks possible. These are Denise, Conan, Ian, Trudy, Karina, and of course, Naomi, who is going to be the moderator for this session. Tonight's first installment of ACM Talks features jewelry and is a way to promote our jewelry gallery, which you see right here behind me. And if you haven't yet come to see our jewelry gallery in person, you are missing out a lot. So please come as soon as you can to see these galleries. They are free for Singaporean citizens as well as permanent residents. I am so very excited to have join us this evening, jewelry historian, Dr. Jack Ogden. Thank you so very much, Jack, for being with us this evening. And Jack will speak to us on this matter of diamonds from Borneo. I look forward to a very, very exciting talk and discussion this evening. Thank you so very much, and over to you again, Naomi.
Thank you, Kenny. Today's talk is titled From Rivers to Oceans, Borneo's Diamonds to the World. Our speaker tonight is, of course, Dr. Jack Ogden. Dr. Ogden is a highly esteemed jewelry historian specializing in the study of early jewelry materials and techniques. He has written and lectured widely, and his most recent book is Diamonds: An Early History of the King of Gems, published by Yale University Press in 2018. He is currently visiting professor of ancient jewelry, material, and technology in the School of Jewelry at Birmingham City University. He is also president of the Society of Jewelry Historians, a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, and a fellow of the Gemological Association of Great Britain. Dr. Ogden, please.
Well, good evening in your time. Thank you very much indeed, Kenny, for that lovely build-up, and to you, Naomi, both for the introduction and also for you and your colleagues for organizing all this. I'm really extremely happy to be asked to do this. I think it's fascinating. I'm just sorry that I haven't yet been able to get to see your new gallery in person. I've seen the virtual tour of it online, and I can't wait to have be able to come over and see it. It really looks spectacular. The subject I'm going to speak about is Borneo diamonds. That's probably a subject a lot of people don't know that much about the history of diamonds from Borneo and the part that Borneo played in the world trade in diamonds. And against this, of course, is put it in the context of your jewelry in the museum and to see how you can help illustrate and also help to encourage research, because this is an area where there's been very little research over the years. And there's so much that can be found out about the whole trade in diamonds and other jewelry items and materials in Southeast Asia. So we can start off with a well-known diamond, which I hope will show up there. The famous Banjarmasin diamond, which sort of epitomizes diamonds. It's what people think of as diamonds today, a large, sort of fairly flashy, sparkly stone. This is about 38¼ carats approximately, now in the museum in Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. I'll come back to this in a minute, but the starting point, of course, I mean, diamonds don't come out of the ground looking like this, bright and sparkly. Diamonds come out of the ground, in theory, like this, if you're lucky. This is a sort of fairly good quality diamond crystal.
Sorry, Jack, sorry to interrupt you. I think there's an issue with your slides. We're not seeing them right now. So maybe if you click the share screen button again.
I will try again. It's not showing up, this one at all. I'm sorry. I do apologize.
It's okay.
Is that showing up now?
Yes, now
yes,
that
it
works.
is.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay, I do apologize.
Yes,
I thought that was. Okay, so the diamond, this big sparkling diamond that came from Borneo, from the Sultan of Banjarmasin, now in Holland. And they're saying it sort of sums up what diamonds are supposed to look like today, bright and sparkly, but it's not the way they come out of the ground. This is how they come out of the ground. This kind of perfect, well, it's a fairly perfect diamond crystal. It's like two pyramids, sort of base to base. And this is a sort of what diamonds should look like in their crystal natural form. They don't all come out of the ground looking that perfect, of course, but this is what they should look like. This is the idealized form. Where did diamonds come from? Well, I mean, geologically speaking, they start deep in the earth and usually brought to the surface by volcanic activity. And this happens, over geological time spans. We're talking about millions, if not billions of years. The source of diamonds, as far as the Europeans are concerned in the early days, was known to be far to the east in India. And indeed, it was in India that the source was believed to be in medieval times. This is a wonderful depiction of the source of diamonds, from a drawing done in 1375. And this might not look like diamond mining, but I can explain a little bit of what's going on there. Hang on, I can get a little pointer here. You can see these guys in front here. They're chopping up a piece of meat. That sounds a bit strange with diamond mining. They're chopping up a bit of meat. Behind is a mountain range with a valley. And in the valley, there are horrible snakes and things, but also that's where the diamonds come from. The men can't go into the valley because of the snakes. So what they do is they throw meat into the valley. The meat sticks to the diamonds. Birds come down, pick up the meat, take it to their nests, and it's much easier to recover them from the birds' nests. So this was the idea of where diamonds came from in medieval times. Not exactly a true view of diamond mining, but it's quite an interesting one to see. The earliest diamonds in jewelry are probably only about 300 BC. I know that sounds old, but by that stage, they'd already been used for 2 or 3 centuries for working other stones, because diamonds are the hardest known mineral, the hardest known natural substance on Earth. And chips of diamonds were used to engrave and drill other stones, probably from about 500 BC, around the Middle East, in India, and so on. The earliest use in jewelry that I'm aware of is this rather interesting ring that was found in Afghanistan, the very north of Afghanistan. It dates to about 300 BC, and it has a pink sapphire, or almost a ruby, in the middle of it, and 2 little diamonds, a diamond on each side, diamond crystals. They couldn't cut diamonds down then, of course, far too hard. The ring was actually probably made by a Greek craftsman. It looks like it. But this was in Afghanistan, and almost certainly Indian diamonds, because there are several places in India where diamonds do occur. They started to arrive in the Mediterranean world a little bit later. This is a ring actually found in Syria in the 19th century with a large brown diamond in it, dating to about 300 or 400 AD. Diamonds are not that rare in the Roman world, that is between about the first, third, 4th century AD in the Roman Empire. Further east, we're only just beginning to uncover something of their history, but they do appear to be used by about the same time. This, for example, is a ring that was found on the west coast of Thailand, not far north, I mean only a couple of 100 kilometers or so, I think, north of you, in Singapore. And the same site produced various things about the 1st or 2nd century AD. But there are also Indian things found at the site, including a seal with Indian inscription. So the diamond could well have come from India rather than from further south in Borneo, further southeast. But that's not certain, because the earliest diamond I know from that part of the world, from Southeast Asia, was excavated at Kedah in the 1930s. Kedah has a perfect siting. It has a wonderful harbour and good anchorage for ships. And one of the things they found in the excavations there was this copper alloy bowl. And in the bowl was a little gold vessel, but also several loose gems. Now, this is the original photographs. I haven't been able to trace where these pieces are now. They might be in the museum in Kedah. But they were identified. They were sent to England at one stage, because these stones were identified by scientists at the British Museum. And in this massive little stones here, we have a amethyst, that's a zircon, another kind of gemstone, garnet, sapphires, bits of gold, that's a couple of pearls, glass, and that little dot, you can just see the little dot there, that is a diamond. So this is the earliest diamond I know from Southeast Asia. But as I say, with Kedah, that's the position of Kedah. It could have come from Borneo, of course, by this stage, but it's also not that far from India, and we do have Indian finds from the same site. Also, this type of grouping of a vessel containing various gems is very typical from the sort of Buddhist world. For example, this is from Afghanistan or Pakistan, dates to a little bit earlier, for early centuries AD, but it also contains mixed gems, some sapphires, an emerald, and a ring that contains, again, a ruby and 2 diamonds. So this kind of sort of little Buddhist or maybe Hindu sort of group is well known in India. So we don't know if the Kedah diamond is from Borneo. I'd like to think it was, but we don't know. The diamond mines in Borneo are mainly in 2 areas, around Landak up here and in the Kalimantan area around here. Now, we know there was some mining of diamonds there by about AD 600, because they were worked by the Chinese and Malays, and there's certainly in the Sung dynasty. And we know that from ceramic finds of Chinese ceramics at the mining areas. We also know that the Sultan of Kalimantan paid tribute to China at about this period. So around about 1000 AD, plus or minus a couple of centuries. But there were also glass from the Arab world found there as well in the same areas, and they were trading with this part of the world by the 8th or 9th century AD. So a lot of trade going on, and so it looks as though at least as far back as, what, 1400 years ago, some diamonds were being mined in Borneo, maybe a little bit older than that. Unfortunately, there are very few written records. I'm sure there's more in Chinese written records, but that's something, unfortunately, I don't really have either access to or the ability to read. So there's huge potential for research here. But the first that the Europeans really knew about it was really, there'd been mention of Borneo going right back. A Greek geographer called Ptolemy in AD 150 seems to have mentioned this island far, far, far to the east. And Marco Polo, the Italian who traveled in the late 1200s, right across Asia, China, India, he didn't visit Borneo, but he did mention it. But it's really only in about 1500 that we start to get clear mentions of Borneo, and soon mentions of diamonds there. I think the clearest mention of diamonds from Borneo is about 1550, quite clear mention, which is 1,000 years after the Chinese were aware of them. The East India Company was founded in London in 1600, and Borneo diamonds was one of the things that was in its sights. That's one of the things it wanted to go and get. They actually sent out a jeweler, a guy called Hugh Greet. He arrived in Borneo in 1613, but it was a total disaster. He complained about a lack of money to buy diamonds, and as far as I can find out, everybody else complained about him. They complained about it. They complained about his drunkenness, his rudeness, his fraudulent dealings. And he was actually described as a wicked fool, and also by profession a jeweler, but in practice a juggler, which I think is a wonderful expression. They didn't have an awful luck either with his successor. They had bad luck with their people in Borneo, but some diamonds were coming back in the early 1600s to London, but it wasn't really profitable. In fact, and the East India Company then sort of changed its focus onto India and what in Madras, now Chennai, as a diamond center. They also noted that it was very difficult to do business buying diamonds in Borneo because the Chinese were there, and the Chinese insisted on being middlemen. The Europeans couldn't buy directly from the miners or the mines. They had to deal with the Chinese merchants, which inevitably means they were paying higher prices. So it wasn't really an economic proposition. Now, the mining of diamonds in Borneo, we know, has carried on since that time, but it's quite hard to document with any detail. This is a really slightly idealized drawing of diamond mining in Borneo, relatively recent. This was done in 1883. It doesn't say which location it was, but it's in Borneo. We don't know an awful lot about the mining of diamonds in Borneo in the 1600s and 1700s. The Europeans had little connection with the miners because the Chinese were there. Even in the 1770s, the Europeans were complaining that the Chinese stopped them going to the mines. So it seems to be a common thing. There were certainly some exports from diamonds to Europe. The Dutch were certainly exporting diamonds from Borneo. The Dutch East India Company, we know from their records, they exported a fair amount of diamonds to Europe. There's a little bit more information in the 1800s about diamonds coming from Borneo. We know that mine output was quite high in the 1820s, then dropped off in the 1850s because some of the mines appeared to have been exhausted.
Hi, everyone. Oh, Jack, are you back? You were frozen for a
Yes.
minute. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, I don't know what point I fell out there. I'm sorry about that.
I think you were on the point on the mine output and how some of the mines were exhausted.
Yes. Well, I said that the export of in the 1800s, I don't know if you heard this, but the mines were largely under the control of local rulers, and they were taking the best stones. And this led to a sort of an illicit trade. The miners were sort of hiding the diamonds and exporting them illegally. So, of course, there are not really good. I'm getting a message here to share your slides again. Sorry, this is. Why is it doing this? Oh dear. Name, share screen. Does that come back on?
Yes, perfect. Thank
Good.
you, Jay.
Yes, I do apologize. It must be my internet connection at this end is dropping out. Anyway, so the local princes were sort of creaming off the best diamonds, leading to illegal trade from the mines. So of course, there's not many records left of all that. We know that in the 1830s and 1840s, diamonds from Borneo were being exported to Java and Madura. And there's probably more diamond mining going on than actually admitted. And we know that in 1838, the Dutch actually blockaded Pontianak in Borneo to stop smuggling by the Chinese. So there's an awful lot of illicit and odd dealings going on. But we do hear that in the 1890s, the diamonds were mainly being exported to Java and especially to Singapore. So this was kind of a growing export business. I don't have many illustrations of diamond mining in the 19th century, unfortunately, apart from this one here. But once we get into the 20th century, there's a few. This is sort of basically washing the gravels to find the diamonds, because the diamonds are all found in alluvial deposits. That means in riverbeds, or what were once riverbeds, found among the gravels. And here they are washing this gravel to try and find the diamonds. This was a photograph taken in 1955. In 1918, 13,000 mining licenses were granted in Borneo, diamond mining licenses. So it was obviously quite a big thing going on once we get into the 20th century. This is mining in Kalimantan, diamond mining in the 1970s. It doesn't look a sort of a desperately pleasant occupation, and things really haven't changed. This is a photograph of a diamond worker in a mine in Kempaka, which is on South Kalimantan in Borneo, taken in 2006. And I mean, he's really up to his waist in mud, sludge, looking for diamonds. So you have to be, very optimistic about finding stones, obviously, to mine in these sort of conditions. So what are they finding? Well, the diamonds that come out of the ground, as I explained, are diamond crystals. Some, like the one here, is a fairly good example. Others, you get all sorts of shapes and broken ones. So how do you end up with a stone like this? The Banjarmasin diamond. Because this was cut. Originally, it was a rough stone being worn by, just a crystal apparently being worn by the Sultan. And then when it was brought to Holland, it was recut, I think in the 1870s, into this very sort of European, what they call an old brilliant cut stone. Now, this sort of brilliant cut, the bright, shiny things you think of today as diamonds, this is a wonderful example. This is in your jewelry gallery, and it's a fantastic piece, the peacock belt from Singapore or the Strait settlements, probably early 20th century, set with these diamonds that are these old brilliant cut, very bright and shiny. So how do you get from a sort of a crystal in the ground to something that's going to look bright in a belt like this or another piece of jewelry? Well, you have to cut and polish the diamonds. And there's a history here, and this can possibly shed some light on the chronology of what was going on in Borneo and in the neighboring areas. This is a Roman ring set with a diamond. So this is 2,600 years old, 2,700 years old ring. And I think you can see the diamond set in it is just the natural crystal. That's the way the diamond came out of the ground. They couldn't cut it. They couldn't do anything with it. Diamonds can be cut, but they're very hard, as I explained. The only thing that will cut a diamond is powder from another diamond. So you have to destroy one diamond to cut another, really. So it was slow to develop. Obviously, you use poor quality diamonds to crush into powder. The earliest diamond cutting or polishing is probably in India. This is a temple in South India, Tanjavur, and it has these inscriptions on the walls talking about the jewelry that was sort of offered to the gods there. And one piece, for example, is a girdle, a belt. Sounds a bit like the peacock belt, doesn't it? This is about 10th, 11th century, so it's quite old. And it's described, this girdle, as having 667 large and small diamonds, diamond crystals, smooth diamonds, square diamonds with smooth edges, flat diamonds with smooth edges, and round diamonds. So the fact that it mentions both diamond crystals and other shapes suggests that at least rudimentary cutting was going on, as say in about the 10th or 11th century. In Europe, it comes a little bit later. Probably they got the idea from from India. It comes a little bit later, probably from about the 1300s, beginning to polish diamonds slightly. But it's really only in the 1500s it starts to develop. And this is an early example. This is actually 15th century. But it's a ring probably found in England set with a diamond. But if we sort of zoom in on the diamond, on one side, we have essentially the original crystal face. These little triangles are typical of a diamond crystal surface, possibly been polished a little bit. But if you turn the ring round, you see it's quite clear they've been polished. And here you can actually see the slight two different angles. So the diamond had been polished. This is a kind of very early days of diamond polishing when they could just do it. They couldn't do anything too sort of sophisticated. How do they do it then? Well, to start off with, they were basically just rubbing stones. This is how they cut gems in medieval Europe. There are many descriptions of this. Essentially, you just rub the stone, the gem or whatever it was, on a flat board, a flat stone, sheet of metal with abrasive. And of course, in the case of a diamond, it would be diamond powder. But this is no good. You can't cut lots of little facets on the stone to make it sparkly by rubbing on a flat board. There's not enough control. And most diamonds are very small, so there's no chance. What was necessary was fast rotary motion. And this came this is one of the earliest drawings of a stone cutting machine. And this dates to around about 1450. Now, we don't know that this was used for diamonds. It's described as being for precious stones. And this is the drawing. It's by Dr. Arnaud de Zval, who was a doctor, an astrologer, and an organist who played the organ. And he explains that this was used to polish gemstones. And this is a 3D computer recreation of it. So you turn the handle, the wheel goes round, the rope there goes round that spindle, so that plate revolves. And you put the abrasive on there and cut the precious stones. You might wonder why a German doctor, astrologer, and an organ player would illustrate a gem cutting machine. But he actually explains, the inscription in there explains that this was an instrument used to polish precious stones, the fragments of which have medical use, because the use of powdered gemstones for medicine was quite a big thing in medieval and even into Renaissance Europe. Interesting study from somebody one day, but it's quite an important thing. So that's why he recorded this. Within just a couple of generations, really, they sort of made more sophisticated diamond cutting machines. They sort of rotated the wheel, this big wheel, up to horizontal rather than vertical. So direct drive onto the spindle for diamond cutting. This is a drawing from 1694, which is in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, showing a diamond cutting machine. And this is an 18th century diamond cutting machine in a museum also in Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a very important diamond cutting center in Europe. So that's why quite a lot of these things are in museums in Amsterdam. So essentially, this is an iron plate. You put diamond dust with a little oil on it to hold it in place. And the diamond was held in this kind of little cup holder. And this is rotated and cuts the diamonds. This kind of cutting had reached India quite early, surprisingly. This is a drawing of a European cutting diamonds. This is a European guy cutting diamonds on a similar sort of machine that we've seen. And this was a drawing done in India in a beautiful book done in India about 1605. So they were cutting diamonds. So the first kind of diamond cuts, once you got past the sort of just roughly polishing the surface, was a thing called a point cut. This is a superb example in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg in Russia. And basically, it's just exaggerating the crystal shape. It's sort of polishing and sharpening it and smoothing it. This drawing is of the 16th century. It's quite an early one. I think actually it's a bit later. They say 16th century. I think it's 17th century. But anyway, the next stage is a very simple, logical one. You just chop the top off. You have your double pyramid shaped diamond crystal and you cut the top off, polish it flat, and you end up with what's called a table cut. There's a lovely example of a table cut ring from about 1640 from a big hoard of jewellery found in London just over 100 years ago. This is a beautiful thing. You can see it's like, essentially, it's a pyramid just with the top cut off. But of course, not all diamonds come out of the ground as perfect double pyramids or even near perfect diamond double pyramids. Diamond splits. It might sound strange for the hardest known material, but it actually splits. It splits parallel to the crystal faces. And a lot of diamonds coming out of the ground in the mines are broken this way. They're thin slices of diamond crystal, and also often very worn and misshapen and banged around and broken in different directions. Once diamond cutting came into use, of course, they could do things with these. So you get these sort of oddities like these, what's called hog-back diamonds in England, diamonds set in a rather nice pendant here. So it's using up these odd bits of fractured diamond. But once they get into the sort of the 17th century, into the 1600s, they develop what's called the rose cut, which is putting lots of facets on. So you get much more of a bright, sparkly look, what you think of as diamonds today, this bright, sparkly look, called a rose cut. There's just two different views there in the drawing. And this is a nice little ring showing an example of a rose cut diamond. There you are. A good example there of a rose cut diamond. But as I said, not all diamonds coming out of the ground are perfect, even perfect fragments. There's an awful lot of rose cut diamonds. They're not these beautiful shapes. They're more like this, just sort of odd bits, odd scraps of diamond that have had these little flat faces on. What they've tried to do is to maximize the weight. So you keep as much weight of the diamond as possible. You just polish these little flats on, retaining as much of the mass as you can, because diamonds have always been sold by weight. The heavier, the more expensive. And so rose diamonds became very popular in the 1600s in Europe. This is a superb jewel made for Charles II of England in 1661, and it's all set with rose diamonds, some fairly good shape, others much odder shaped rose diamonds, but using up rose diamonds. This is a very good example, and they're quite good diamonds. More common is all these little sparks, they used to call them, sparks of diamond, very small rose-cut diamonds. This also is from about 1640. It's from the same find of jewellery that I showed the table-cut diamond ring. So what about diamond cutting in Borneo then? We talked about diamond cutting in India, and we've talked about diamond cutting in Europe. What about India? What about Borneo? This is actually very difficult to trace because of lack of written records. It has been suggested there was diamond cutting in Borneo as early as the 1500s, but I've found absolutely no real evidence for that, and I can't find any reference to it at all. It seems unlikely that earlier, but perhaps not impossible. The gentleman you see here is a French merchant called Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, and he made 6 voyages overland in those days to India, and he described diamonds, diamond cutting, and whatever. Now, on his 3rd voyage in the 1640s, he actually went to Bantam, Western Java, and the king there was having a dagger made. And he asked Tavernier if he could supply the diamonds to fit into its half, the handle bit they hold. And Tavernier said that it's not easy to do this, because normally the normal practice is that you have diamonds and then you make the settings to hold the diamonds that you've got. But to be presented with a piece like a dagger handle, which is already got the settings made, to try and find diamonds to match is an almost impossible job. You'd have to have them cut specially, which is probably going to have wastage and so on. But the king insisted that Tavernier tried. So he went to Batavia, which is Jakarta now, and to see if he could find any diamonds to fit, and he couldn't. There were no diamonds that would fit the settings in Jakarta. So he went back to the king and said, I haven't had any luck. I can take your dagger handle, I can take it to India if you like, and see what I can find there. And the king decided at that point it wasn't worth pursuing, and that the whole matter was dropped. But the interesting thing was that, first of all, that Jakarta, or Batavia as they called it in those days, was obviously a diamond center, a market for diamonds. And secondly, if you could buy cut diamonds there, were they being cut in that part of the world? Maybe in Borneo. We don't really know. The possibility, but we can't be said for certain. Now, why didn't Tavernier go to Borneo? Because he mentions diamonds from Borneo, because he said that it was very difficult for independent foreign merchants to buy there. So another inkling that it wasn't easy for the Europeans to get hold of diamonds. The Dutch trading companies, of course, could have sort of treaties with local rulers, but for the individual merchant, it was really a very difficult thing. So how do we trace the history of diamond cutting in Borneo? Johann Wirken was a German, and he was the first to visit this part of the region, Southeast Asia, first German to visit, and in 1612. And he described that the king of Johor, which is just the north of it, just north of Singapore, he said he was wearing a kris, you know, one of these daggers. The hilt and sheath were made of pure hammered gold, studded with many diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. We don't know whether the diamonds were cut diamonds or not diamonds, or not cut. I think there's a chance they would have been, but we really don't know. And if they were cut, would they have been cut locally or come from India? We don't know. The one I'm showing you here in the National Museum in Jakarta, this is of course much later. This is from Bali. And all we can say about the date is that it's before 1908 with the Dutch attack, before then. And I doubt it's very much before that, as I'll come back to in a moment. But that's the problem, because the lack of datable pieces of jewelry from Southeast Asia with diamonds in, very few pieces that you can put a clear date on. And this is where so much research needs to be done. This is the earliest datable example I've been able to find set with diamonds. I'm sure there are others, but instead I just haven't been able to find them yet. This was a kris presented to King William I, by the Sultan of Madeira in 1835. This is King William of Holland. So this was presented in 1835. Madeira is one, you know, Indonesian island just off the northeastern coast of Java. And apparently it's recorded that it has been made in the king's palace. So one assumes it was made in 1835 or just a little bit before that. It contains 117 of these rose-cut diamonds at a closer view there. And you can see they're very, very mixed shapes and cuts. Now, this period, around 1830, is very late for having lots of cuts like this in a European piece of jewellery, and it's not typical of Indian jewellery. So one has to think that maybe these diamonds were being cut in the region, whether it was being cut in Borneo itself or nearby is uncertain. But I think it's a very non-European cut by this standard, by this time, unless there was a market in older diamonds from Europe. Sort of, we don't want them anymore, they're out of fashion, sell them in Southeast Asia. I don't know, unfortunately. This is another of these kris handles, a little bit later, of course. This is part of the Lombok treasure. This is this piece is still in Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum. And again, it's set, I'll come to in a moment, with rose diamonds. The Lombok treasure, for those of you who don't know, this is part of it here. The island of Lombok in Indonesia was conquered by the Dutch in 1894, fairly brutally, and the Dutch took away 200 kilos of gold, over 7,000 kilos of silver, and a huge amount of gems and precious stones of various types. A lot was returned to the Indonesian government in the 1970s. A few pieces can still be seen in Holland in the Rijksmuseum and in Leiden. And one of these pieces still in Holland is this example. It's a closer view, this handle. As you can see, that these typical rose diamonds, there's one missing there, but from the shape of the setting, I think almost certainly a rose diamond. Here we have another piece. This is the National Museum in Jakarta. This is from in Jakarta. This is actually from Siak, Sumatra. It has been suggested recently this was actually made in Borneo and using diamonds cut in Antwerp, but I'm not convinced they were importing all these rose diamonds. But it is again rose diamonds. You can see here quite a nice cut one in the middle and these more misshapen ones around the edge. This is one of the pieces in your jewelry gallery, a fascinating object. This is really beautiful. I can't wait to see this in the flesh. It's a fingernail guard, and it dates to the late 19th or earliest 20th century, and it's from Java. But again, it's set with rose diamonds. Now, if we go back to this piece from Bali that I showed earlier, piece in Jakarta, we know it was made before 1908. Now, if we zoom in there, you can see the stone at the top there has got a flat top to it. This is a rose diamond, but here there's a flat top. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier. It's what they call an old brilliant cut or an old cut diamond. This is a natural progression. We've talked about the basic, the crystal, the point cut, first of all, when they just polish the sides a bit, the table cut. But the next stages were just really to increase the number of facets, getting it more sparkly, if you like, not losing a lot of weight, but getting it more sparkly right through to these sort of shapes, to the modern stone, which is very typical of modern jewelry, of course, this modern round brilliant. The Banjarmasin diamond in the Rijksmuseum I showed earlier. This also, I mean, it was war booty. It was owned by the Sultan of Banjarmasin. It used to be just a rough stone, a rough crystal when he wore it, seized by the Dutch in 1859 and recut in the 1870s. So this, we know, was cut in Europe, but were they cutting brilliant cuts in Borneo? This is a piece, again, in the National Museum in Jakarta from the Lombok treasure. So again, we know it was made before 1894. And this is a wonderful example of one of these brilliant cut, old brilliant cut stones. We'll talk when I have a talk with Naomi at the end of this, a bit of discussion. One of the pieces we'll talk about is this piece because it does have some interesting information. But if we go back to pieces in your jewelry gallery, we tend to find largely rose cut diamonds. This is another amazing object. I mean, this is a sort of a clothing fastener, again, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. It's extraordinary, really a fascinating object. Another one I can't wait to be able to get over to your part of the world and have a look at this. It is a wonderful thing. But rose diamonds, and the same is true of this wonderful set of brooches in your collection. Again, late 19th, early 20th century. These again set quite clearly with rose diamonds, these mixed shaped diamonds. And also another set of these brooches, the pair on the side and the center heart-shaped one, very typical for the area. Again, we'll talk about this later in our discussion. But again, late 19th, early 20th century, but all rose diamonds again. You get a closer view there of the rose diamonds in it. Then we start to get, of course, some brilliant cut. This is a very European-looking piece in many ways. These stars are very typical of European jewellery of the late 19th, early 20th century, and set in a very European manner, style, not European in that the diamonds are set in the gold. In Europe by this period, the diamonds are usually set in silver because the white metal showed off the stones better. But here it's all in gold. So I'd say this is certainly made in Southeast Asia and set with brilliant diamonds. And this is the back. It's open back setting now, of course, so light can get through the stones, which is fairly typical for brilliant cut diamonds. So what about diamond cutting in Borneo? Well, it's very difficult to trace back. Odd mentions of it. Certainly in the 19th century, there was some diamond cutting, maybe the 18th century. I think there was a stage that was skipped with diamond cutting. I know no examples from Southeast Asia of diamonds with diamond set jewelry with point cut diamonds, table cuts. By the time we start to see cut diamonds in jewelry from Southeast Asia and in the pieces in your museum, they are the rose cuts. And I said they were coming into fashion in the 1600s in Europe. So I would suggest that when diamond cutting started in Southeast Asia, and presumably in Borneo, it wasn't before the 1600s at the earliest, and I think probably at least a century or more after that. And when they did start to cut, it was just carrying on the tradition of the rose cut diamonds. This is a diamond cutter. This is in Borneo. This is a photograph taken in 1953. And it was explained that he was an independent. He wasn't employed by a factory. And he would contract to cut and polish a stone, a diamond, for presumably a jeweler or maybe a private person. And he would rent time at a wheel. That's the way it worked. This was in a diamond cutting factory at Martapura, which is in South Borneo. Really, it was a big centre, Martapura, diamond market there, still in recent times, and where the cutting was carried on. Now, what is fascinating to find out, and this is something I was unaware of before I started looking into it for this research, for this talk, was that by the second half of the 19th century, a whole new supply of diamonds was available in the world, South Africa. And there's the biggest diamond field ever known at that stage, South African diamonds. And by the end of the 19th century, large numbers of South African diamonds were imported into Borneo, where they were being cut. They were being cut in Borneo and then sold on to the rest of Southeast Asia, including Singapore and then up into Vietnam and even China. So we have Borneo becoming a hub for diamonds in the opposite direction to what you expect. Diamonds from South Africa coming to Borneo and being cut and then being passed on to the rest of the world. And it may be at this time that they started doing the brilliant cut that we know it, possibly. This is a photograph taken in a Borneo diamond cutting factory in Kempaka, South Kalimantan in Borneo in 2006. And you can see here quite clearly, this is the back of a brilliant cut diamond, no doubt there. And here we have a diamond's brilliant cut, modern again, a photograph just taken a few years ago, I think 2006 again, showing brilliant cut diamonds. So my suggestion is that the Borneo, they were cutting rose cut diamonds probably far longer than they were in Europe, but then maybe in the 19th century only started to cut in the brilliant cut diamonds. So there's still a lot to find out here. It's only the very sort of the early days of what we know about diamond cutting in that part of the world, in Borneo, the diamonds from Borneo. But it's interesting that it really was a hub, wasn't it? I go back to this piece, the wonderful peacock belt in your museum, a superb example. Now look at the diamonds there, they're brilliant cut diamonds, but are the diamonds local or maybe even South African? Of course, at the time this was made in probably the early 20th century, they could well be South African stones cut in maybe Borneo. Is the color a clue? Well, it's interesting because Borneo produces diamonds of all colors. There are some fine pink diamonds and even some beautiful blue diamonds found in Borneo. There's even some diamonds found in Sarawak, a little bit further north from the diamond fields I talked about. And the Sarawak diamonds have been described as having a very pure lemon yellow color. Look at the diamonds here. There's some really bright yellow colors. The South African diamonds are also, quite a lot of them were yellow. In fact, they still refer to yellow diamonds as Cape colored, Cape being the South African Cape. But the South African ones are more of a sort of straw color yellow. And this bright, more sort of lemony yellow has been associated with diamonds from Borneo. But it's only a suggestion. But we cannot say at this stage whether these diamonds are likely to be Borneo diamonds or imported from South Africa. We can assume they were cut locally in Borneo, but there's still so much to be done. So really what I've talked about is very much an introduction, a start. And I really urge people to take up the research because there's so much to find out, not just about the diamonds from Borneo and from Southeast Asia, but the whole history of the jewelry industry, the trade, and the extraordinary importance of diamonds. This is the back view of the peacock brooch. This is a photograph that Naomi took, and I think it's a gorgeous one. All we can really say with clarity until more research is carried out is that Borneo has been an international supplier of diamonds for more than 1,000 years. Initially, mainly to China and elsewhere in Asia, and then from the 1600s to Europe. Mining has continued pretty well continuously right through that period. There's some ups and downs. But also in the last century, Borneo has been a cutting center where diamonds from other parts of the world have been cut and re-exported. A century ago, a lot of the diamonds from being cut in Borneo were being exported to America and the UK. So truly, I think you can say from rivers to oceans, Borneo's diamonds have certainly reached the world. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for the informative lecture, Dr. Ogden. I would also like to take this opportunity to quickly give a plug for the Banjarmasin exhibition at the Malay Heritage Center, which is currently on show till the 25th of July. Of interest is, of course, the diamond trade and mercantile roots of the Banjarmasin community in Singapore, as well as a replica of the historic Banjarmasin diamond created by the Gem Museum in Singapore, which Jack has shown us images of. Now, the second part of today's talk involves a short discussion on dating, setting, and cutting styles of diamond set jewelry, some of which are on display in ACM's jewelry gallery. The technical analysis of diamond setting and cutting styles can sometimes give us further insight into an object's history, its cross-cultural and hybrid linkages, and even trace the fluid dynamic of adaptations and innovation in craftsmanship. We will discuss 4 jewels today, beginning with the famous brooch from the hoard of Lombok treasures. This brooch was repatriated back to Indonesia in 1977. Jack, I noticed that this brooch includes diamonds of different setting and cutting styles. Will you be able to highlight these differences as well as its cross-cultural characteristics?
Yes, I mean, this is a beautiful piece. I mean, the gold work looks typically Southeast Asian to me. Beautifully made, sort of granulation work and so on. We have the rose diamonds that I was talking about, but in the middle is this brilliant cut, this old brilliant cut stone. But what's fascinating to me about this, and I think we can zoom in a little closer, is that the setting holding the diamond is of silver. Now, I mentioned earlier that in Europe, it was normal to set diamonds in silver, whereas in Southeast Asia, it's more usual to set them in gold. This style of setting here, with these little sort of silver clawy bits coming up, is very typical of European 19th century setting. And I suspect, I can't prove it, but I suspect that this piece, the diamond with its silver setting, was imported like that from Europe and set locally. So they sort of set the setting, if you see what I mean. I can't prove that, but it does suggest that to me. So it's a fascinating mixture of sort of cultures and things. Again, more research eventually might throw out more about what was going on in this terms. But yes, I think it is cross-cultural. It's the ultimate example of the cross-cultural piece. It's fascinating. Yes. Beautiful object. There's one like it. There's one's actually still in the Netherlands, in Leiden. They have almost a pair to this piece, set the same way. I've looked at photographs of that, again with the silver band around the setting. It's so lovely. wonderful thing.
And I think it's quite interesting because it really contrasts with the smaller rose-cut diamonds on the perimeter of this brooch. And it's set in a different setting, which is a box setting, and it doesn't have the silver strip of film and foil setting that goes around the diamond, which is, as you mentioned, typically European. So I think we can most certainly really start to look at jewelry from the perspective of setting styles and how it gives us different clues as to how it might be, as you mentioned, hybrid or cross-cultural. The floral sprigs for me too are actually quite interesting, because my first impression when I first looked at this was that they remind me so much of the form of Izora flowers, which are typically tropical. Yeah. So, I mean, but of course, this is all deduction. And I think overall, generally, this really complicates, further complicates the story of diamonds, and that diamonds are not just raw commodities that moved from one place to another. The necessity of cutting diamonds for gem set jewelry really led to further networks and movement across borders, which I think, as you rightly put, really warrants more research. And I'm so glad you also brought up the very early account by Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, the French gem merchant who was in Java in 1648, because not only did he become close friends with the Sultan of Bantam, he also recorded a really fascinating account where the Sultan was given a large diamond from the Queen of Borneo, which he then sent to Goa to be cut. So I think this report is interesting because it really reveals that Goa had an international reputation for diamond cutting in the 1600s, and this is way before the discovery of diamonds in Brazil in the early 1700s.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think that there wasn't much diamond cutting, or certainly for larger stones, in Borneo as early as Tavernier's time in the 17th century. I think it came later.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, on the topic of looking at jewels, I think our second jewel that we'll look at now is on display in ACM's jewelry gallery. Referred to as a paniti tab, this long brooch was really worn by women of all ethnicities in Indonesia. Lots of portrait photographs from Batavia show women wearing these long brooches to secure the front of their blouses. So, Dr. Ogden, I wonder if you can touch upon, also this very ancient type of cutting and setting style of diamonds, and when did this style of setting begin in Europe?
Well, the setting here is fascinating because it's very much of I'll call it a sort of European style setting. The way that you can see these little sort of serrated bit around the edge of the setting there and there. There's sometimes called this a pie crust setting, because it looks like a sort of baked pie that you sometimes get those sort of edges around it, and that came in Europe really by the sort of about 1400. It was very early on, and it survived, and it particularly survived in Spain and Portugal, and right in actually to the 19th century, this sort of style of setting. So I think this is I would call this a very much of a sort of Spanish influence, obviously possibly through the Spanish in the Philippines or something like that. But so they've used the sort of rose cut diamonds, and so it's sort of based on a Spanish ornament. Whether equivalent Spanish ornaments fasteners, I don't know, but when we talked this over briefly the other day, you pointed out these little spikes around the edge. And I'm sure I've seen something like that similar on a Spanish pendant that was a cross. And it was actually like the halo at the top of a cross. So I think there's a very, very, very strong Spanish influence here, which is fascinating. Again, cross-cultural. I mean, it's these influences went in all directions, and this is a lovely example with, again, beautiful rose-cut stones. I love rose-cut stones. I think they look very sparkly, very fun.
Yeah, and I think it's quite important to note as well that the typical setting of rose-cut stones, I mean, from quite early on in Europe was that it was wrapped around like this in a box, and it was with a close back.
That's an interesting point, because that's the one we're going to talk about in a minute. We'll come to the so I show this wonderful set of vases. I mean, you can tell us something about the shall I show that? I mean, Naomi had a quick look at that. Shall I show this quickly? I can always come back to that one. So you can talk a little bit, please. Tell us about this type of set.
Yeah. So I think it's quite interesting with the Kerongsangs. You know, they're really fasteners on blouses. They have very practical application, and one of the more popular common styles is the Kerongsang that comes in a set of 3 with 1 large heart-shaped fastener and 2 smaller circlets. And really, as you can see with these pictures, the design and style of Kerongsang, they really vary very widely. Even if we just look at the singular heart-shaped fastener itself, and so Kerongsang seen here on the blouses of sultanas from Johor and Aceh, for example, on your left and in the middle, show heart-shaped fasteners with a hollow center. And the photo in the middle shows the main consort of the Sultan of Aceh, who wears the Kerongsang in, I think, quite an atypical fashion. 2 circlets are placed on each side of the heart-shaped fastener, and directly below are gem-set buttons, one of which is placed strategically in the hollow center of the heart-shaped fastener, giving the illusion of a more densely decorated jewel. And really, over time, these heart-shaped fasteners became more densely decorated. The hollow centers were filled with diamonds, and they also grew to immense proportions, measuring more than 20 centimeters long and almost as wide. So the image on your right, I think, really quite aptly illustrates this. But I think, you know, less on the, I mean, if we could go on, I think, more on discussing the gem setting components of this specific Kerongsang we have. I think it's quite interesting because, you know, Dr. Ogden, we talked about how rose-cut diamonds in Europe were typically set in a box setting, wrapped around in gold, or they would have a closed back setting. And this style of setting, I don't know, to you would have been totally not typical in Europe.
I mean, I mean, this type of the setting with his sort of, we call it sort of scalloped side, these sort of rounded curves and again around the stone, is very common in the 19th century for diamonds. But almost the diamonds are always, or I think 99% of the time, are brilliant cut stones. They're not rose cut. To have rose cuts set in this sort of setting would be very unusual in Europe. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be very, very unusual. So again, you've got, I think, very much sort of a local. I mean, this is certainly European influence. This kind of backing, this scalloped backing. It's very typical of the European style, but set in rose diamonds, it would be very un-European, if you like. It's again a mixture. And if we turn it over, look at the back of this piece. It really is. The workmanship at the back is as good as the work, or if not better than the work on the front. And this is all made up. I mean, this is not a casting. It's not like some modern piece of jewelry that's been cast on. These are all made up from separate strips of gold sold together. I mean, it really is a fantastic object. And you can see that the flat backs, the rose cut diamonds, they're flat backed, but in open settings. And this is the maker's mark. And I think the guy must have been very proud of his work. I'm not surprised he put a nice big mark on it, because it is an amazing object. I love it. I think it's very beautiful. That's always the problem with museums, isn't it? I mean, it's a shame you can't display both the back and the front of something, because so often the backs of pieces are as beautiful as the front. Some people have tried mirrors, but it's never very successful. So just, it's beautiful. It's lovely to be able to see it. So thank you for sending this photograph for me. It's wonderful. Perhaps you can say a bit about the mark.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the Chinese shop mark really is a testament to the widespread popularity of such blouse fasteners. And, you know, based on photographs of the time, they were really worn by women of all ethnicities. And this mark identifies its maker as Xiang Yi. So it's on the left column, it reads from top to bottom, and with a hallmark that means that says Yuan Xing. So it really is certifying the jewel as made of pure gold, securing the quality of the product. And I think one of my favorite moments discussing this jewel with Jack is really approaching the jewel from the perspective of what is a usual way of setting jewels in Europe, and what is unusual or different or differently done in our part of the world, which I think really is an area of scholarship that really hasn't been approached or really studied in detail. And I think that the open back setting that we see here, that we take for granted for so much of the jewels that we see of this time, really should be could be looked at with more scrutiny in the context that of course, they are rose-cut diamonds with an open back. And what does that tell us about how jewelers were also spending, or gem cutters were actually expending extra effort in creating flat backs for rose-cut jewels so that they could be set in an open back like that. I think that's so interesting
Yes.
to understand.
When we talked the other day, you said there was a disparity with the different people, the goldsmiths and the setters were different. Maybe you could explain.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, based on some publications that we have here, it said that especially with this setting of brilliant cut diamonds in the early part of the 20th century, and that with this setting as a jaw technique of having open backs, they were really the specialization of Indian or Sinhalese gem setters, and the Chinese gem setters really didn't come about setting diamonds till much later, several decades later. And I'm still trying to find out why that's the case, but I think that in itself is also tells us such a wonderful multicultural story of the making of jewelry, that they actually pass hands. There are different stages, and the mode of production in itself is so fascinating to understand.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, another thing here that's very, very different from a European piece is the use of pure gold. I mean, 24 karat gold is 24 parts and 24. It is pure gold. I mean, I don't know if anyone's analyzing to see if they really are 24 parts, because jewelers haven't always done exactly the purities they say they have in history. But in Europe, gold jewelry, the commonest standard in the past was 18 karat, which is just 75% gold, or sometimes 22 karat. But I mean, jewelry, I mean, if you look in sort of Victorian or I mean, in 18th, 19th, 20th century Europe, you won't find gem set jewelry more than 18 karat gold, because they consider 24 as far too soft to use.
Right.
But I believe it is tradition. I think it's tradition in China, and I think it's tradition in much of Southeast Asia. It's quite interesting to work out, exactly why and when and how widely that spread. Because I mean, in the West it's 18 karat. In Southeast Asia, it's 24 karat. So where's the boundary? where in between does it change, and why? Right. But it's fascinating that in Europe, 24 karat gold cannot be used for making jewelry because it's too soft. And here you have this gentleman here who made this piece, proving us all wrong. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating insight. Lovely.
Yeah, and definitely also more a significant area for research. And I think last, because I'm quite conscious of time, we'll look at the peacock belt. And I think there's the image after that. There's a zoomed in image.
Yes.
And I think we can really start to look at and discuss, Dr. Ogden, you mentioned this, the use of all mine cut diamonds, but they're really, on closer inspection, they are colored diamonds, and that spectrum of colors of diamonds that come out of Borneo should also be put into perspective here.
I think it shows a very different. Can I put my favorite photograph? Your wonderful photograph of the back. Love
yes,
this.
Of course.
I mean, it's beautiful because it really shows the colors. I'll go back to that though. But in Europe, first of all, the setting would be silver because the European gold at the back, silver actually around the stones. And secondly, they wouldn't mix the colors like this, not on a piece of this importance, because the best diamonds were the colorless ones, the white ones. And so for the sort of a person who would have ordered this and worn it, they would never in Europe put up with this mixture of colors. But is it a different philosophy there that accepts this? Is it because these are the only stones that were available? We don't know. But I mean, I think it's wonderful because it's like the older cut diamonds. They give much more variety in the way they reflect light than the modern perfectly computer programmed round brilliants. You have a sort of a brooch of those, they all look the same. You get with the old cut stones, you get this amazing variety of sparkle, of fire coming out of them. When you combine that with color, it gives an amazing sort of beauty that you don't get in most European jewelry. I think it's incredible, because here we're so sort of, it has to be white, it has to be this quality, this kind of standard. They're all sort of numerical grading, these things, whereas the true beauty comes out in a thing like this. And I think it's wonderful, this kind of disregard for what sort of the West would say was the right thing. I think it's all fantastic. It's a breath of fresh air for a European jeweler to see this, I think, and see how wonderful this mixture can be, this random selection of colors. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, I think sometimes as well, although there's no definitive answer to these things, but sometimes it could even be, as you suggested, something as simple as, you know, these were the diamonds that were available, and one was to pick diamonds of specific shapes and sizes that would fit into the composition of the piece. Yes. And sometimes with jewelry, it's about the overall spectacle of the object, and less so about the individual quality of diamonds sometimes. And okay, we're 1 minute, 1 minute to 8 p.m. So I thought we have a few questions here. I'll just draw up a few questions. Perhaps the first one, and I don't know if Dr. Ogden, you have some insight to this. What is the reason that diamonds from Borneo have never been commercially mined in an organized manner? Even in the recent years, mining methods are primitive and exclusive to the local residents.
Well, there have been some attempts in recent years. I mean, I must admit, this is not an area, I'm a historian, so I sort of tend to ignore very recent times, but there have been various commercial attempts to mine diamond on a larger scale. But I don't think any of them have been that successful. And of course, nowadays, there's a move against big commercial mining, mainly for environmental reasons. And, you know, you have people digging holes in the mud is one thing, because when they go away, the holes will fill in and that'll be the end of it. But if you start getting huge machinery in, digging huge great holes in the ground, then it sort of trashes the whole area. And I think now it'd be quite difficult to bring in big industrial mining, and I hope they don't, because it's not good for the environment. But there have been attempts over the years, certainly over the last 100 years, to do it on a larger commercial scale.
And perhaps just one last question. We have a few here, and I'm sorry we can't get through to them, but just one last one. Thank you, Professor, for your interesting presentation. You mentioned diamonds were exported to China. Did this suggest that ancient China had a love affair with diamonds?
I only could find one piece of jewelry, early piece of jewelry from China, a ring set with a diamond. But we don't know whether that diamond came from, I mean, I can't remember the date, it's about the 4th or 5th century, so 1600 years old. And we have records from China that say they got some diamond rings from India, and at least one occasion got a diamond ring set with a diamond from Java. So they weren't using them in any large quantities, but then they were rare things in those days. What I don't know is if they were mining, then, I mean, they must have had a market. So if they were digging up diamonds from sort of 600 AD right through to the European arriving, where were they all going to? I mean, it must have been worthwhile going into the mud to dig these things up. There must have been a market, and that's something that really needs more research into it. But it's a good question. But there's not a lot of diamonds in an early Chinese jewelry. I haven't found it yet anyway.
Thank you, Jack. So my suggestion is we have about 7 more questions, all of them really, really interesting. So my suggestion is perhaps you could take these questions with us. I could work with Jack to answer them, and maybe we could reach out to the participants and provide you with some answers. But in the interest of time, it is a little bit after 8 p.m. and I would like to bring this session to a close. If you enjoyed today's ACM Talks lecture, do tune in to our second lecture on the 15th of April. Dr. Paul Haggis, Associate Professor in Interreligious Studies from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU, will speak on the syncretic and hybrid dynamic of religious art with ACM Curator of Southeast Asia, Konan Cheong. Do keep a lookout for our EDM, which will be out shortly on our website and Facebook page. Thank you again.